Everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look at the 2026 Open Championship, British Open, Royal Birkdale. Ron, where are you in the Open Championship, British Open? We'll get started there before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of the stuff. You know, people have real strong feelings here about can you put the British on there, or do we just call it the Open Championship?
Yeah, I don't think it matters to me that much. I'm old school, that's what people recognize it as still. So, I think the proper name obviously is the Open Championship, but it's always growing up. I remember getting up early in the morning. It was always called the British Open. And so that's always stuck with me.
I'll tell people from a business standpoint, people still search British Open at a pretty high rate. So, from an SEO standpoint, when you're trying to have videos seen on YouTube or articles found in web searches and stuff, casuals are very much clicking, the British Open there and clicking into that to look for stuff. So, all right, going to be back coming off of exciting golf weekend, and technically have a 2-tournament week here, but this is our final major of the year. Royal Birkdale, great fields. Scottish was exciting. You have any Scottish thoughts before we jump into what we're gonna have here with young Tom Kim? Still super young Tom Kim, just turned 24, and is popped another win and has got a couple of good showings and seems to like golf over here. Any thoughts on the Scottish before we jump into Royal Birkdale?
Always love the Scottish. I think the course is very underrated. I know more people are coming around to it. It's kind of one of those new links courses. But yeah, I test these guys every year. I think it's not a true links, but just it's kind of like almost transitioning the players into what they're going to see, for the Open this week. And yeah, I jumped on Tom Kim when he was 94-1, on Sunday last week. And look, it's one of the rare times in golf betting where you kind of get that true marriage of recent form and course history. Like my course history sheet, he had the best course history at the Renaissance Club out of anyone. And look, finished third at the U.S. Open just a few weeks ago. So, that doesn't happen much where you actually hit on that and those two things come together. But, I think for some reason he just has a real skill at that type of golf and hasn't come through fully yet, in the Open Championship. But just good to see him, kind of a 3-year slump there. But, you just back your mind, he has that win equity. He's won a couple times. But good to see him regain that form. And it's a great tournament overall. Obviously, Scottie with the miscut. I think we'll see what his price kind of drifts to if it does drift. But interesting conversations with him this week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Ludwig miscut, Xander miscut. It is wild to think of in context of Tom Kim and his career. Now, again, we aren't covering the Asian Tour extensively. No one really is. But he turned pro at such a young age, and really even came into our lives at a pretty young age still, and was able to have success early, have, to your point, a multi-year just kind of dry spell, and then wins again. He's still 24. It is kind of insane. I telling on myself here, I simply could not bet him because I find him insufferable to watch. And I hope that changes for him. I actually think he's endearing as a personality. I think he's fine, but like fucking hit the ball. It's so painful.
He's got a lot quicker though over the last. It has.
It's my wife. I had it. I was on vacation, and I had some of the John Deere on Sunday, and like we got to Tom Kim, and my wife said something about it. She's like, "What's he doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea what he's doing." But now he's not hitting the ball. So, good number by you. Good pick off, and it feels nice to have a little bit more in the accounts as we head to a major championship in a week that people like to go a little bit more heavy, especially since it's the last one. And I agree with that. So let's jump into some Royal Birkdale thoughts before we look at the field and some stuff here. But it is a prominent member of the Open Rota. It is a 7,200 yard par 70. We've undergone some changes here since the last time we were here in 2017, which was absolute peak Jordan Spieth. I think it was like the peak time of Jordan Spieth, and I think his Open Championship at Royal Birkdale was peak Spieth in all of its stuff. If you haven't seen or you don't remember, it's been a long time, or maybe you weren't following golf. Kind of electric back nine on Sunday, where he goes full speed, spraying the ball basically off the planet, gets lucky. It's a drop that takes a hell of a long time. Great bogey save, and then just rattles off like birdie eagle, birdie finish, and wins the claret jug. And was at the height peak of his powers at that time. And people love this course. I mean, it's actually an interesting. There's a lot of interesting context, I think, around where this falls in it, because it is, doesn't have maybe some of the charm as some of the others, but I think a lot of the players find it to be, you hear like quotes of it being the most fair of the Open courses in terms of how it plays. I think, there's sometimes with link style golf courses, whether it's weather related or the ball being demanded to play on the ground or how things can play, that, sometimes great golf shots aren't always rewarded. But I do think there's, a pretty consistent drumbeat from the players that they feel that this is a very, very, very fair test here up in Northern England. And we're going to get, we got Tommy Home game. We got some Justin Rose narratives. You're going to get a lot of the England guys here being pretty popular. But tell us about Royal Birkdale. How does it stand out? How does it differ? And maybe some of the changes since the last time we were here.
So par 70, just over 7,200 yards. Only 2 par 5s, with both coming on the closing stretch of holes.
Yes, love that.
Interesting twist. I mean, interesting twist on any course. One thing that's kind of always difficult for me with courses like Birkdale that haven't been played in a decade and that, I've never been to in person is just kind of the lack of familiarity and having to rely on videos and a lot on, what others' opinions are of the course. So, obviously what you said, very common refrain is that, it's as fair as an open course as there is. We have mostly flat lies in the fairways. You're not going to get many unlucky bounces. The dunes are all to the outside of the fairway corridors. No blind shots. Every hole is kind of right out in front of you. It's kind of a best shots win type course, which is very rare, at the Open. So, the volatility of, Royal St. George's, Liverpool, Carnoustie, you won't see as much of that this week. And, looking at early forecasts, the wind looks to be pretty tame throughout. We're still looking at, double digits, maybe some gusts approaching 20, for some periods. But, it looks pretty sure we're going to get firm and fast conditions. And, ball strikers test for sure. With short game, I would say, especially around the green, if the winds are tame, not being weighed as heavily as most years. And so, the thing I love, if I'm mostly accurate off the tee, is that it's a graduated miss penalty. So small misses aren't going to hurt you as much. But if you miss wide into those dunes and the gorse and the 8-inch fescue, you're looking at bogey or worse automatically. And so I think that is a great thing for any major. I think the Open doesn't test that sometimes, but just if you miss super wide, I think some of these guys are going to be hurting. So, the toughest challenge is approach play. You have these very well defended greens with runoffs and, the riveted pop bunkers and tricky pin positions and, trying to control your trajectory. And so, I think I just kind of described a course that the Schefflers and the Morikawas and the Henleys of the world, I think, are just great fits for. And so even the greens, they're fairly benign, very little slope, 3-putt avoidance, not as important this week, easier to make long putts. So a bit of a different Open test for sure.
Yeah, and good call too. I mean, small greens, and that's part of it too, where, you're going to have around the green play come into play because it's just harder to hit these greens. I think having watched as much as I possibly could in the last couple of weeks in terms of, flyovers or people playing it or people that have played in the past, just trying to, typical standard fare for us, in these major championship rotations, especially when you have some renovations and stuff. Right now we have off the tee club is mixed. I think it would be probably low end mixed, high end less than driver. I think there's going to be just a lot of opportunities for these guys where it just makes sense to keep yourself in play. The reward of pushing it down on what's going to be, I think, very, very firm and fast, because they have had a pretty dry season. We aren't going to have a ton of wins. I do think it ends up being a spot where, guys that really can separate and gain through distance are going to be having to find different ways to gain and figure it out this week. So I do think leaning on a little bit more less than driver makes a lot of sense. What's interesting too, when you look at the data from a few years ago, no one was hitting fairways, right? Driving accuracy was significantly below a tour average event. Typically in these situations, when we have that mix, and you go, hey, everyone's missing fairways at a pretty high rate, this is really less of a reward typically for accuracy because everyone's missing. But I think you made the important piece that I think people would miss in this data is it is a graduated rough that's very different. Like think of Aronimink, there was no graduated rough, right? There was no first cut. Sometimes the first cut is minimal and maybe a little bit penal still. Here it's just really not going to be a problem. If you just hit a ball, it bounds down the fairway and bounces and just kind of rolls off of the fairway into the first cut, I don't think it's going to matter a ton. It's still going to be probably pretty hard packed fescue that these guys aren't going to have a hard time navigating. So typically when you see this mix of course metrics, to me, it's like a wing foot situation, right? Where it's like, oh, no one's hitting fairways here. So Bryson was able to overpower it and say, hey, there's no penalty really for missing. That's not really the case. I think there is going to be a penalty for spraying, but I think you'll still see pretty low driving accuracy numbers here. Yeah, you want to avoid the bunkers anytime you're at an Open Championship. What I think is funny too is like there's one hole with water, but I think the hole with water is very much in play, where water is, it's like a drivable par 4 that, like, if you catch the wrong side of a slope, like that little pond that's on the right side short of that, I think it's the 5th hole or 7th hole. It's one of those. It's very, very much in play. So, yeah, I think, we've had at times, I think at major championships, the course is kind of the star and is pretty prominent. I think it's just going to be the golf. I think this golf course is going to be fine. It's going to present itself well and hold up, but I don't think it's going to be driving a ton of storylines like, say, Aronimink and Shinnecock did. I think it's just going to be who's going out, to your point, striking the hell out of it this week and getting it done. So the weather, again, hard to play weatherman 5-6 days out on a tournament in the Midwest. Very difficult to play weatherman, in Northern Europe, in the UK this far out, but it looks pretty benign, where you're not going to have, I typically kind of limp in terms of futures for Open Championships because I'm really worried about getting smacked in the face with a weather wave. And we still might, but it doesn't feel like there's anything right now that's going to be super crazy. So keep an eye on that. I understand if people want to jump in a little bit later on Open Championship outrights or bets because you want to see the wave advantage. And I think that makes sense, but it doesn't look like it's going to be really, really problematic here. So any other course things you want to look at before we jump into the odds board?
No, and I just think to remind people, there is no strokes gain data for, back
Correct.
in 2017. So we're kind of going blind on, a lot of the off the tee approach metrics. It's why you see a lot of blanks in the rabbit hole. So we just have the basic stats. It played really tough in 2017. It was much windier, kind of cooler. Course played soft. So I think we're looking at a much different Open. So for me to go back to 2017, I think not really that helpful to compare because conditions are going to be different. Obviously, like you said, some of the course changes, and just a few of the holes just different. Obviously, the par threes are much better now, but I think overall, we can still use the rabbit hole for looking at difficult, whether it's on approach. Obviously, we have a par 70 course, so par 4 scoring is going to be important here, but still a lot we can get into with the rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good way to summarize it. All right, look at the odds board here, courtesy of our friends over at SharpStack. It is fascinating. Again, Scottie hasn't missed a cut in about 4 years, and we did have a time on Saturday, I believe, where Rory was the favorite in some spots. Just kind of wild to see Scottie with a 7 and maybe even some 8s, depending on where you're shopping. But Scottie and Rory kind of in a tier of their own here, short of 10. Rory played frustrating golf on Saturday. Someone who had him on Saturday or, this past week, and to watch him just kind of airmail 9 holes on Saturday morning and then just come out on fire again on Sunday was frustrating, but playing really good golf. I think his game is in good shape. So is Matt Fitzpatrick. He, I think, is in a deserved spot to kind of be third on the odds board right now. I mean, he's just been so solid. The putter's been frustrating. Like if you've been betting Matt Fitz and sweating Matt Fitz, it's probably been frustrating at times, but he just continues to keep himself in the mix here. He's as long as 19, so short of 20 everywhere. There's, and you could see in the market, some very popular spots for Matt Fitzpatrick. Tommy Fleetwood's going to be very much in the news. This is a, not in the case of everything in New England is a home course for Keegan Bradley type situation. This is actually like I grew up 5 minutes from here. I'm very familiar with this course, home course scenario for Tommy Fleetwood. I think that number is insane to me when you think about how infrequently Tommy Fleetwood actually wins golf tournaments. It's hard. He's a tremendous golfer. It is making myself clippable here. Is an unbettable number in my opinion. I would love to get behind the Tommy narrative this week at like 30. That's never happening. I know that, but like clicking sub 20 Tommy is wild to me. John Rahm saved himself a little bit, but very interesting to see Rahm at north of 20 in some spots. Same thing with the Xander Schauffele. Xander's approach game has been rough for a couple months now, which has been tough, but that's a big number for a previous 2-time major championship, including an Open Championship winner. Chris Gotterup obviously competed here well last year at the Open Championship, coming off of his win at Scotland, and then got beat down in the futures market after the John Deere Classic win. Colin Morikawa, I think, is a fair price here. As you kind of mentioned here, kind of around 30. Ludwig coming off of a miscut as well. Again, this is kind of someone who just wins at the same clip as Tommy. Not very often, even though they're in the mix a lot. I think this is, probably fair and maybe get some attention north of 30. Ty Hatton in the mix around 30. Bobby Mack at 40. Hovland at 41. Wyndham Clark at 41. Justin Rose right there at 43. Sam Burns probably doesn't play. I believe we haven't had that confirmed. He's not out of the field. Do you have any Burns insight? But it sounds like I don't even think he's in Europe right now.
Yeah, have not heard a thing about him.
Yeah, the Burns family is expecting. Didn't play last week, and would have actually probably been a pretty interesting click last week at the Renaissance Club. But not sure what's going on there. Not sure what's up with Russell Henley being available at 54. I'm biased. I can't speak to that, but that seems kind of wild to me. Patrick Reed, 59, as high as 60 on MGM. And then you got another kind of sizable chunk here. Siwoo, Tom Kim, Minwoo Lee, Jocko Neiman. What number would you need on Bryson to consider Bryson?
Oh man.
You've seen Bryson's latest YouTube videos. He's doesn't seem I've seen some clips just that have shared on social. Doesn't seem like fantastic major prep, but to each their own. We can all make money however we need to make money. But I'll tell you that 71 definitely isn't enticing. Neither is 49 or 50 that's anywhere else. So you jump down here into the Lowry, JT, Brooks, Koepka range, and then you can get some, down into some triple digits. So interesting odds board. Again, shop on a Monday morning. These things are very fluid. You start to see some of these popular names get shifted down. Some guys will drift because no one will click on them. So, again, always advise having options at as many books as you can as you kind of shop around here. So Brandon in the chat sharing that Michael Kim tweeted his course review a little bit, is practicing this morning, confirming we are playing very firm and fast. He said he had a 4-iron, 290 downhill or downwind. I had a 3-wood 330. So again, wind doesn't look like it's going to be a factor, but ball's going to get on the ground and roll quite a bit. So being able to get out there and play some practice reps and get a feel for it's going to be probably pretty crucial for these guys. So again, that's why I think you'll see some of the early drifting positively on the Euros, or guys that have a little bit more links experience, links history, because again, they just have a little bit more familiarity than what we see here stateside. So
I
Interesting odds
think
board.
I think the bigger question is, at what number do you take Scottie? Like, if he got to 9, would you take him? If he got, I mean, for me, it's tempting right now because, I think he fits this test. And, I don't know. I think there's somewhere the competitor inside of him, not that that matters in golf a ton because you still have to perform. Doesn't matter how hard of a competitor you are, but like, deep down, he's grinding out there. He's trying to figure it
Oh
out.
yeah.
So man, that's just so interesting this week.
It is. The tough part is that, doing a lot of my research and, modeling and stuff that happens before we go live here on a Friday morning, I've made most of my bets. So what's interesting is that when he starts at 4-1, sometimes 350 or whatever, when you want to pick him off live, if he gets off to a slow start, you're still looking at like 6. Like he never really gets that far out. But if we're going to start at 750 or 8, or who knows what happens here, he becomes more appealing live where I can justify that. Like if he drifts to 10 after a slow start or just a bad front 9. And look, there's a lot of like teeth to this course in like the first 6-7 holes, right? So like this opener that's a tough par 4 to start. So it could very well have a situation where you get off to a rough start, and it's just kind of how you're playing, the market reacts to the first handful of holes. So I would be personally shopping a little bit more live and interested in buying a live double-digit Scottie, because I think we're going to get there faster, if that makes sense. But if you haven't made a bunch of clicks and you haven't fired, a full card or towards the top of the board, then I understand why someone would like, I can't justify, 18 on Tommy Fleetwood when Scottie is 7 on FanDuel, for instance. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Like, and like, look, there's a lot of pressure in home games, especially in golf. It happens so rarely. Like you have Tommy telling you how bad he wants this one and like how he's kind of shown up in the past when things get a little bit tighter. You're going to tell me that's serving him well? I don't think that serves him super well. Like I think that probably works against him in a lot of ways. So it's a tough question.
That's why Fleetwood's number is always up there, because the odds makers are just pulling at your heartstrings. They're like, it's Tommy.
It'd be a great story. Yeah. Everyone would love Tommy to win. Like, yeah, no, you're right. And he's competitive all the time. He's a tremendous golfer. He's top 10 player in the world. So I'm not saying it's unfair. I know those are the things that are driving the market, and winning is hard, but it happens. It's happened so infrequently against the best competition since he's been on tour. Again, even though he's in the mix often, it's a really, really, really hard number to click. But yeah, Tommy Fleetwood, Justin Rose, those are probably like, if you don't have them and you're looking to cheer for a story on a Sunday afternoon, those are probably the ones you'd be okay watching get across the finish line, narrative wise and storyline wise. But yeah, it's a tricky click. Like coming into it and doing the research, I'm like, yeah, I would love to bet on Tommy. And I know that I'm never going to see anything that would even be somewhat appealing from an odd standpoint. So, even being kind of in the same neighborhood as Fitz just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. All right, let's kind of look at some stuff through the rabbit hole. Like you said, it's a little trickier because we don't have a ton of the data. And again, we have so few instances of like true links. So if you wanted to model corollary courses or links courses, that sample is also super small. I think it's okay to look at it. But what are some ways that you're starting, from a foundation standpoint in modeling this week?
So a couple things. So if you go to the course type menu and just open that up so people can see the options there. I've had a couple people in the last month even who were like, hey, do you have coastal courses? And I think some people forget about this because it's not in the filter by conditions menu, but every course type is here. There you see the hybrid links, which is kind of what Shinnecock, Renaissance Club was. They're not true links. So we have true links when you scroll down, but those for right now, PGA Tour courses are pretty much going to be all the Open Championship courses. Again, getting DP World Tour data here soon. All those other links courses, that they've played over there for years, we're going to be adding eventually. So that true links category will be a little wider here in the future. So just FYI to people, what's coming. I know we've been saying that for a while, but it really is this time.
It finally is.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think coastal courses is interesting to look at just because you're mixing some of the wind stuff in. Obviously, you know, on tour they do play quite a bit along the coast, so that's somewhere to look. But for me, you know, I'm kind of, you know, getting back into what we normally start with in the filter menu. You know, yeah, you can go look at scoring conditions. You know, you want to look at difficult, very difficult. I think that's a great place to start. Maybe mix that in with field strength. You know, we have the major category there if you just want to look at majors. But for me, you know, I'm kind of like we do trying to recreate, you know, even though this may not be the toughest, you know, open venue, you know, the winds may allow it to play even, I don't know, maybe a half stroke over par, maybe a little more. So I'm going to kind of be probably stripping out the easy. You know, I might even go average, difficult, very difficult, you know, just to kind of cover those bases. Not really messing with course length as much. You know, it's kind of in that average range. So for me, you know, just trying to replicate conditions, field strength. You know, we've had a lot of signature events, as everybody knows, this year again already. So I know it's different. It's a different type of course, you know, with it being, you know, and, you know, these links conditions, but, you know, you do the best you can. And, you know, I think even, you know, looking at something I'll do is look at just Open Championship history. And I'll look at total. I won't even look at average or rank, but I want to see, I think that experience factor, you know, guys who have played here going back to 2016 and have all that experience. And, you know, even modeling that way a little bit where I'm looking at the total, I'm giving guys a boost who maybe there's some guys who, you know, got her if he's only played here once, the Open once. We all know he's a great win player. He's great in these conditions. But again, he still doesn't have all the experience of a Justin Rose. So I think that to me is going to matter, just that experience. And so just a whole lot of different ways you can still do it this week.
I like that. That's a good call. You could put a minimum round feature in if you wanted to kind of pull out some of those other guys. But I do think that's probably your best way is to try to look at maybe some raw total data. Again, it's not something we typically would do because you know you're going to mess with samples of people. But yeah, that's I think a pretty viable way. You can see here just looking at the last 6 months, as you said earlier, we're just kind of pulling out easy and very easy scoring conditions. So we have difficult, very difficult, and average turned on. And the same with field strength. You can see it's been a nice little run for Tom Kim on a small sample. We don't get a lot of Neiman. He's got a small sample here as well. Cam Young and Ludwig are up here. Again, very enticing ball strikers, both struggling mightily with the putter as of late. It was Cam Young's magic sauce there for a little bit, and then I'm not sure what's going on there. Ludwig struggled, as we mentioned too, with the putter. Hatton, Scottie, Rory, which makes sense. Patrick Reed, small rounds of a $5,600 former Open Championship winner, and Francesco Molinari, Matt Fitz, Wyndham Clark, Akshay, Ricky, Xander. There's Goddard, Minwoo, Rahm, Henley, Hovland, Morikawa. These guys are all gaining at least a stroke in these conditions over the last 6 months. Again, we're not looking at just when scoring's been difficult, so you're going to get again tougher tests against stronger fields, but not designed specifically to recreate this week's condition, which is kind of tricky too. Like some of the other shouts that you said, but you can mess around if you just want to look at Open Championships. We'll go here, Open Championships. I'll kick out the sample for all records. Ron's point, we can look at the total and see, who's got a really sizable sample of data. Jordan Spieth's been really good. This is interesting. Again, what's interesting here is we have 40 total rounds. You only have 16 rounds of, again, this is cumulative. So this is 16 rounds of measured data where he's lost. Again, typically that would jump out because you're looking at typically per round average. So that caught my attention for a second, but this is cumulative. So putter hasn't been great, but his ball striking has been awesome. Xander's played really well there. Xander's kind of fascinating. I'm going to bring this up real quick because I started to see some drifting in his number. Like, he missed a cut. He doesn't miss a lot of cuts. Maybe we can get some stuff, but like this right here, just kind of troubling. 24 rounds of him being below field average on approach, which has really been his calling card. The putter's been struggling a little bit too. I wanted to find reasons to click on Xander. It was kicking out to like 25 or so, but you can see here, Travelers, Scottish, been kind of rough. And it hasn't been a great approach season really since the Masters. He was just cooking here for a little bit and couldn't get over the line, and now we've kind of lost some stuff too, and you're seeing it leak into other parts of his game, which is tough to see. But he's been good. Rory, Rosie, as you mentioned, again, we're strokes gained data's the total is cumulative. Some of the details are only going to be in these smaller pocket samples because we just don't see as much. Stenson, Tommy, Rahm, Day, Scottie in a small sample, but again, this speaks to Scottie and how good he is. But this is kind of what Ron's talking about, just kind of looking overall at just who's got a lot of reps out here on these types of courses and types of setups. That's interesting. I think it's another interesting, tough ball striking test, as we talked about. So if you want to look at gaining off the tee, difficult, very difficult. Gaining on approach being difficult to very difficult. If you wanted, let's see what the sample pulls for us. You could add average if you just want to pull out the easy and very easy. I think you can even do this in looking at maybe, I don't like to do this often, but like maybe also adding mixed and less than driver off the tee in these scenarios too. I think that tells us a little bit of a story. Let's see what our sample is. If I go back maybe a calendar year, looking at, again, trying to pull out driver heavy courses and places where it's kind of easy to gain ball striking wise. Cause I think this is kind of a fundamental piece of what we're looking at this week. I want to kind of kick in a little bit of a smaller sample than all records. Let's see if I get 30-ish, 40-ish rounds. Yes, this is kind of okay for me. Again, trying to replicate the conditions the best that we can. Small sample for Alex Fitz and Bryson. Same thing for Hatton. They don't do this often. So we'll pull that out and just kind of look at the guys with the bigger samples. Scottie, Matt Fitz, Colin Morikawa, Rory, Ludwig. Some signal here for me, I would say. Small-ish borderline sample, but I think it's interesting. Ludwig Xander, Akshay, Tommy, Henley, Burns, Bobby Mack, Harris English, Wyndham Clark, Mav, Bridgman, Brooks. You can see some other guys here. Gerard, Wrighton, Cantley, that are all gaining at least more than a stroke. So again, trying to replicate difficult ball striking tests where it's not driver heavy, where you could still separate total. If you want to search simply ball striking in this sample, Colin, Spawn, Rory are your top guys. You see Fitz still there, Xander there, Brooks, Ludwig, Gerard's up there. Obviously, the around the green stuff is dragging him down overall, but I think that's an interesting way to look at it too, Ron. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. I think bringing in the, less than driver stuff, I think that's huge this week. I think, obviously there is a high missed fairway penalty if you're really wide. So, looking at off the tee stuff, for me, again, distance from edge of fairway is going to be big. And just, looking at, we do have the option for, high missed fairway penalty is high. So how do players perform when they have to find it off the tee, like they cannot spray it? And so that combined with, distance from edge of fairway, like we always talk about, just presents that accuracy picture for me. And so it's kind of honestly going to be one of the biggest things I'm keying in on this week is, I think also with, our ability to look at, who's really wild off the tee. There's some guys who have kind of toned it down. Minwoo Lee comes to mind. Years past, he's been very wild. He's kind of almost, he has tightened up off the tee where he's not missing as wide as he was in years past. And I think that's something very important to look at this week because if you're not keeping it in play as far as if you're in the dunes, if you're, where Spieth was, up on the hills, you're going to be struggling. And so, that's where it all starts. You can't set yourself up for approach here if you're not, again, don't have to be in the fairway, but you just can't spray it wide.
Totally agree. Yeah. Can't hit it off the plan. No foul balls here. It's just, you're bringing too much variance of having to get really lucky if you are, playing from those side hill lies into the, knee-high fescue and stuff. So this sample is pretty small. But I think there are other ways to go about it. You don't have to do the off the tee gaining difficulty. If you just want to simply look at, who really is cognizant of it being a high miss fairway penalty or rough penalty. and who keeps the ball in play or who gains strokes off the tee in those samples. Still a smaller sample, but Rory off the tee, you can see the distance from the edge of the fairway is not great. He will hit a foul ball. Gary's so good off the tee. Cam Young's been awesome off the tee this year. Sam Stevens, which is interesting. Henley here. And again, you can see him basically hitting the ball 30 yards shorter than Rory and still, gaining off the tee, gaining through distance. It matters. Tommy's a great ball striker, great driver of the golf ball. He's rewarded here. You can see the distance from the edge of the fairway number is really good. Siwoo is he's always going to model pretty well. Ball striking numbers are so good. Starting to play a little bit better. Played well last week. Made a bunch of putts last week. Keeps the ball in play off the tee. Keith Mitchell's a great driver of the golf ball. Colin, obviously going to keep it in the fairway. See positive distance from the edge of the fairway numbers. Same thing with an Aaron Rye. Even though the carry distance is pretty minimal. So this is I think an interesting way to look at it. Wrighton's up here, Fitz, here's Scottie. Good way to look at it. I think it matters this week. I think it's just a starting point of, there's no reward of pushing it down very high, down the fairway, and you bring in a lot of bunkering, you bring in the fescue, you got to keep the ball in play off the tee. So, and it's a tough place for good drive percentage. So looking at, who's performed well in that here too, I think is a little bit of signal. And you can see some of the accurate guys, right? Again, Rye, Tommy, Alex Fitz, Henley, Colin, English, Sam Stevens, Rose. I think that's a little bit of signal for me this week as well. Anything else you want to look at here?
Just take both those filters off and let's just look at distance from edge of fairway, like just recently. I want to see some of these off the tee guys, like look at the negatives. Who's really jumping out here? I know some of these guys. It's hard this week because you have so many guys in the field who don't have a lot of recent data.
True,
but I think just looking at, we've seen Scottie, who's been wilder off the tee. He's been missing right a lot more than he ever did, and so that's another thing. We have the left tendency, right tendency, data as well in there. I'm not really sure from what I remember, if one side is worse to miss on the other at this course. But as you do your research this week, that option is also there as far as, if either side is better to miss on. But I think that's one of the things I'm going to, for DFS, especially narrow my player pool down, is looking at who is spraying it, who is missing when they miss. It's really wide. Especially I'll take a little quick look at recent form as well to see that.
Yeah, so here's just last 6 months distance from the edge of the fairways, minimum 8 rounds. So we don't have the full field, but I'm pulling out some of the small sample guys. And you can see some guys that, will typically can spray it. You got both Højgaards in here. You got a Wyndham Clark. I think we've seen, there's some notes from your guy that mentioned that Puig doesn't like links courses. That showed up a little bit in Scotland, a little bit. Penge, Hideki, we know can go off the planet. This checks out for both a Ben Griffin and a Cam Smith, even on a small sample, keeping it in play off the tee. So you mentioned, Minu's been a little bit better, but doesn't mean he's great. He's been a little bit better. Thigala, this should, if you watch golf, this should pass the eye test statistically of who's sometimes can push it down there, but get themselves in trouble with foul balls. Inverse, Henley, Morikawa, Siwoo Kim, Aaron Rye, Daniel Berger, Brian Harmon, Matt Fitzpatrick,
everyone you'd expect.
Correct. Just not a lot of driving distance in here, but accuracy numbers, yes, but distance from the edge of the fairway is such a better signal. With the benefit of AI and things now, when I've talked to, trying to train some things around distance from the edge of the fairway, if you need some confirmation bias, the machines will tell you how much better of a stat that is than driving accuracy. So, if you need the big bad AI machines to tell you, they will definitely give you some confirmation bias that it's a elite stat to give you some signal in terms of guys keeping the ball in play off the tee. So, look, if you were just going to not build a full-on model, you want to kind of look at the things that we did, and you're just kind of going to pick through and look at some stuff here. I think these are some of the key stats that I would just kind of look at and see if you can draw any commonalities between some of these searches and seeing some names that continue to pop up that I just think make a lot of sense. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but like part of what the things I think you and I are trying to tell viewers and listeners this morning is like, you got to give yourself chances this week, and playing from the fairway, keeping control of your golf ball, especially off the tee, is going to give yourself the most chances. It's a non-starter if you are, gaining through distance and trying to really rip driver. I think you're going to be in trouble this week. So this is just 6 months, and I think it's a sizable sample when you're getting in here to 50, 60 plus rounds for a lot of these guys. So, you see anything else that I have? Anything else that you have? You want to take a look at?
I mean, there's obviously with par 70, difficult par 4 scoring, we kind of already covered that with, difficult conditions, but that's another thing.
Yeah, I have that in my model.
Look at, another one that we don't have to look at, but people to be aware of, with the renovations, there is a lot more short grass areas, tighter lies around these greens. So, we have the option of looking at, short grass, around the green. So yeah, there's, like usual, you could get lost here for hours just kind of going through some of these things. But I think those are a couple interesting ones that I'm definitely gonna be modeling for sure.
Yep, around the green, proximity and short grass, difficult to gain around the green. Just looking at strokes gain around the green when it's difficult to gain. I think those are important pieces. There's smaller greens, but there are some mounding, and you could have some tricky shots there for sure. That matters. I think we both like the around the green proximity, and then when you can kind of get into it based off of where you can really see some splits on some guys that maybe have better luck around the green in thick rough versus short grass. I think that's important this week because I think there's a little bit more of that. Now again, you're gonna have some around the green in thicker rough because maybe you really roll off the back of the green or something like that. But I think I would lean more on short grass if I was looking to split out, the thick stuff versus the short stuff this week too. So, same thing. Difficult to gain putting. Look at recent putting. You're not going to get a big fescue look here too. And it sounds like maybe we'll get some reports from the course. It sounds like they're going to be a little bit faster than we typically see in terms of green speeds. So typically, I know we would look at maybe slower greens. I still haven't decided on what to do with that. I didn't model slow greens. I put difficult to gain putting and recent form putting. I didn't do anything with surface or slow, but kind of adjust as we get information from the course or any setup signal that we're going to get from the RNA this week or anything like that. So I think that's also, and then bogey avoidance. Anytime we're talking about difficult scoring, find situations where guys can keep big numbers off the card, whether it's, bogey avoidance, double bogey avoidance. I think those are things to look at this week too. So you can go over to the site, check out our models. If this is new, you click this expert model section, and you're going to get a bunch of models from, folks that contribute to the site. You can create your own. You can, if you're really adept with Excel and can do stuff, you can download any of these into a CSV. You can combine models, copy ours. We have a general model on the site. If you just kind of want to look at it from a, 500,000 foot view, you can just go in here and look at, our key stats model that Ron puts together for us. He'll have his own model on the site along with, for subscribers in Discord, his really detailed model that comes every week as well. So, Mayo's model's up here already. Mine's in here too. Just click view. And again, if you want to just get a sense of, where things go. Also, we put together a consensus rankings once everyone gets their models up and loaded, and you get a sense of just, how do we as a group, as a staff, think of the field this week. So check that out. Let us know if you have any questions. I know we're going to get a lot of Corrales Punta Cana Championship coverage this week, but get a little bit of a first look there on the site for you as well. But I haven't even looked into that. So it's Open Championship week. So we're trying to cover all of it, but Ron's probably the one that's most likely to put out a betting card. So you probably haven't looked at anything yet, right?
I have not, but I will in a little bit here.
Yeah. So, all right. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us as always. You can see on the site here too, there's a free Betsperts Golf subscription article. That's through our friends over at Novig. It's a great deal, still available. Deposit $5 with them using our promo code BSG. You're going to get a full year at Betsperts Golf for free. That's it. They're going to send you an email Make sure you're in a no vig state, but it's like, I don't know, 35 states or something like that. So it's a good amount. Great way to check us out if you haven't already done so. But if you're just here for the free stuff, we appreciate that as well. Subscribe to the video, like, let us know in the comment section who you think is going to win this year's Open Championship. Come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Andy and I will walk through our betting cards. We'll talk a little bit more of course news, anything that we're getting from players that are out there, anything that we get from a setup standpoint, and maybe adjust and go from there. But appreciate you as always. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.